Imagine the government leasing your land to someone else against your wishes and with an endless right of renewal.
This is an example of inequity, an example of a systematic racism.
You remain the owner in name only. You can't use it, you can't cancel the lease, and you can't charge a market rent.
It's a massive discount. If this place was freehold, it would have been at least double. At least.
For over a century, Māori landowners have had to live with perpetual leases they never agreed to.
You see the opportunity you have missed out on right in front of your face. How does that not create stress, bitterness, anger, hurt, hopelessness?
And despite decades of opposition, successive governments have failed to bring them to an end.
That's the law today, and that's what it is. It is what it is.
If a group of whenua landowners went to their Member of Parliament and said, my land's been leased for 120 years, I didn't agree to it, I can't stop it, there would be some outrage. There might be a law change.
We're just going to keep fighting because it's what's right and it's the truth.
Around 26,000 hectares of Māori land is held in perpetual leases. It includes farms, residential housing, public reserves, even sports fields. So how is it that legislation that clearly discriminates against Māori is still enforced today? And what does it say about the notion of one law for all New Zealanders?
A lot of the Tairāwhiti bays on the east coast here, there's just something magical, eh? When you first see the bay stretched out in front of you, I just exhale. It's like, and there you are. You know, it's like opening up an oyster, eh? You know, and finding this jewel in the middle. That's what she looks like to me. And then you see our maunga surrounded by what we know is tapu places for us. There's no words to describe when you know you're home.
When Olsen-Ratana talks about Tokomaru Bay, you can feel the aroha. But it's a love that's bittersweet. Her heart resides here, but her tūranga waiwai, a block called Tuatini, has been taken.
What I knew growing up was from my mum and my uncles and aunties, and they would say to us often, see this whenua all down here? This once was ours. Some of it still is ours, but you can't go on it. So every time we came here, Mum would walk from the top by Tuatini Marae all the way down and give me the history and whakapapa of this area and what happened to the families that used to live here, and tell us that we could never return to the land.
Tina's story of land loss begins with her maternal grandfather, Hori Whakataka. He was born in Tokomaru in 1893. 2 years later, the government passed a piece of legislation called the Native Townships Act. Then, in 1916, at just 23, Hori joined the Pioneer Battalion to fight in World War I.
And at that time, they still had the whenua, yeah? And whilst he was overseas serving, the Crown came in and wanted Tuatini, or Tokomaru Bay, for Pākehā settlement.
The Native Townships Act was designed to speed up colonisation in areas where Māori were refusing to sell their land. The aim was to establish townships and provide economic opportunities for Pākehā settlers using Māori land, including Hori Whakatakas.
So while he's away at war, they come in and take his whenua for Pākehā settlement. And there's records that state that was the purpose of the Native Township Act. By the time he returned, the land had been taken, and he returned without a leg after serving over there, and with a war bride and a newborn baby.
Hori Whakataka's land became part of the Tuatini Township blocks. The whenua leased out against the wishes of the original owners. Initially, the leases were for 21 years. But one of the original lessees, Englishman William Oates, had other plans.
Kept lobbying the government. Then there was a clerical error made where after the first lot of leases came up for review, well, they argued and lobbied that the intent was for perpetual leasing. So a clerk of the Māori Land Board by that time issued the wrong leases. And it was leases for general land that allowed for perpetual leasing. So in our case, the leases were issued wrongfully anyway. So first they took the land, then they issued the wrong leases to it. By the time my grandfather returned, the land was gone. And now we're alienated from our land.
That supposed clerical error imposed further restrictions on Tuatini's landowners. Meanwhile, William Oates's businesses flourished. He established a boarding house, butchery and bakery, and later a storekeeping business. A keen sportsman, he set his sights on another piece of land.
Yeah, he wanted the cricket field over there, on that part there.
Tracy Takarua is Tina's cousin and one of the beneficial owners of the Tuatini Township blocks, which includes the local sports field.
All along our beach, was a battlefield, and friend or foe who fell, well, that's where they were buried. When we had the pandemic, they were buried here. When we had the ho-ho wars and all of that stuff, they were buried here.
William Oates converted the ancient Tokomaru burial grounds into a sports field without the permission of council or the landowners. In 1918, the landowners complained to the Native Land Court and asked for co-governance of the grounds.
It was upon the understanding that for original landowners and their successors be on the board to manage it, so that the kōrero of the whenua and any decisions being made were done correctly, and that hadn't happened.
In 1946, the Commissioner of Crown Lands agreed to change the status of the land to a recreational reserve, which today is administered by the Gisborne District Council. And it's the council who decides who gets to lease the grounds. It's an ongoing source of frustration for owners like Tracy. Last year, the issue came to the fore again when the local sports club applied to council to renew the lease.
All in favour?
Do they consult with you or talk to you or engage?
When they put the notice out about renewing the lease for the club rooms, our submission was to object to the lease being extended. So we presented up at Tuatini Marae over there to the council hearing committee. And at that hui, when we laid out the kōrero, the history, the significance of this whenua, the councillors said they didn't even know. They didn't know the story. So, that shows that the Gisborne District Council have not done their due diligence as kaitiaki of our whenua. So they're not even a kaitiaki. They're just mowing it. Mowing it and giving out a lease. We're not against recreational activities here. What we are against is having the Gisborne District Council dictate to us how we manage our field or our resources or our facilities. That stuff can come back to us to do. We're not dumb people. We're pretty clever, we're resourceful, we're resilient. That's what they keep telling us when the cyclones and that hit. We're resilient. Well, surely we can manage our own land, and we absolutely can.
Like most perpetual leases on Māori land, over time, the Tuatini block has become entangled in various pieces of legislation.
I'm on my way to meet historian Heather Bassett, one of Aotearoa's leading experts on the history of Māori land legislation. After the signing of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, when did legislation for whenua Māori begin to be introduced?
Pretty much straight away. The first act I can recall is the 1841 Māori Native Land Claims Ordinance, And it's just, there'd be an act every year at least since then. This is a folder from 1911 to 1993,
Heather has written more than 40 reports for the Waitangi Tribunal, including on tuatini.
Most people know what a lease is, but what's a perpetual lease?
A perpetual lease means that the leaseholder always has the option, if they want to continue on the land, to get another term. And that power is just solely the decision of the leaseholder, not the owners. It's an automatic right of renewal.
The Native Township Act was introduced by the Liberal government at the turn of the century. What was happening around that time?
You come to the late 1890s, there's more and more resistance from Māori to selling any more land. And so instead, the Liberals kind of came up with all these other laws and other ways to kind of have control over Māori land, even though it remained in Māori ownership. And so in the case of the Native Townships Act and in other acts, and bringing in these leases, I think for Māori politicians like Carol and Ngāta, at least it was going to preserve the freehold, it was going to preserve Māori, the land in Māori ownership, but it still meant that the Liberal government could pursue its aggressive Pākehā settlement policy.
In your view, why was Māori land treated so differently to general land?
There's so much paternalism in both the legislation and also, even more so perhaps, in the administration. I read hundreds and thousands of files from these government departments, and they very much take decision-making authority on themselves and assume, oh, Māori won't be able to farm this properly, or there's too many of them to properly administer and make decisions about the land. It'll be much simpler if officials do this for them.
And did the leases actually produce an income for the Māori landowners?
The big problem with the perpetual leases is the rent was only reviewed every 21 years. And rent in most cases is set at 5%, 4 or 5%. So that's 5% of the value of the land. And say you took on a lease in 1950, it's 5% of the 1950 value. By 1970, the value of that land's increased enormously, but you're still only getting your rent based on the 1950 value. And then it's also further complicated with multiple ownership, that if blocks had tens or hundreds of owners, by the time £200 a year is distributed between 50 people, you know, it's a pittance.
To add insult to injury, when the native townships were first established, it was Māori who had to pay for the cost of the surveys and the building of roads.
The cost of the survey was deducted from the rents. In some cases, rents didn't start getting paid out for about 10 years because of the survey deductions. If the townships didn't succeed, Māori paid a very high cost for townships that they, in most cases, had not consented to start with.
Today, the tuatini blocks earn meagre rentals. Tina claims some owners don't see a dime. And that's because in 1953, the Crown put a new statutory body in charge of their land, the Office of the Māori Trustee, Te Tumu Pairoa, and it charges the tuatini landowners for administering the leases.
Well, we're penalised against whatever rents come in. We haven't seen any money. We've tried really hard to get them off our land. And so even to today, we're having to pay. They take the lease money, they take their overheads off, they charge a fee for that. And in some cases where there is whenua, where there is no lease on it, they're still charging their overheads on it. So we're actually owing them money for land that they're administrating, that they're not leasing. So we're in debt to them. There's no equity here. You know, there's nothing, it doesn't exist for us.
We'll talk more about Te Tumu Pairoa later. For now, I'm heading to the other side of the country. Perpetual leases remain in force right across the motu. And I'm on my way to the region that has the highest concentration of perpetual leases in Aotearoa.
Here in Taranaki, nearly 20,000 hectares of whenua Māori is locked up in perpetual leases, a legacy of land alienation that began with the New Zealand Wars.
1.2 million acres of Taranaki land was confiscated by the Crown in 1865. The perpetual leases here were created in 1891 on some of the last vestiges of land that remained in Māori ownership through the West Coast Settlement Reserves Act.
I like to think that most New Zealanders are fair-minded. And so I think what I'd like people to think about in this context is that this is a law that still mandates the denial of opportunity to Taranaki Māori citizens.
Dion Tuta is the chairman of Parininihi ki Waitotara, an incorporation that represents 11,000 Taranaki Māori shareholders.
Class 1, like best land in the country for dairy farming and some of the stuff.
How many hectares are under Parininihi ki Waitotara?
Parininihi ki Waitotara is responsible for 19,610 hectares of whenua, which is under perpetual lease.
Unlike the Tuatini blocks, Parininihi ki Waitotara administers its own lands on behalf of owners.
By the time the incorporation was established in 1976, the Māori trustee, which controlled the land from 1880 to 1976, had sold 75% of the land that was returned to my tūpuna. But coming back to why the incorporation was established, it was to resist that. It was to resist land sale.
What do you estimate the loss of income to be over your whenua, over those decades that your whānau hasn't been able to utilise the land?
The economic and social loss is actually incalculable because of the opportunity that our whenua has produced. But I think the economic loss is one thing, but the severing or the denial of human potential and opportunity for our people is just as devastating. You look around this region and you see the wealth, and in another universe where perpetual leasing did not happen, perhaps that is us, right?
Yeah.
Perhaps that is us, yeah.
Despite the ongoing injustice, Dion doesn't have an issue with the lessees. He recognises their relationship with the whenua. His issue is with the Crown.
That system imposed on our tūpuna, denied them their tino rangatiratanga, denied them the right to use their land in accordance with the way that they wanted to use it. It treated them like children, or it treated them as people with a disability who were unable to make their own choices around how they should live their own lives, purely because they were Māori. And so I have nothing but aroha for my tūpuna. I have huge disgust for the people that implemented this system over them, yeah.
In 1996, that system was set for some big changes. Reviews of the perpetual lease system highlighted to Parliament the outrageous injustice that had been able to endure.
Finally, after a century of meagre rentals, it was recommended that rental reviews take place every 5 years instead of 21 years, that landowners could charge market rentals and could purchase back their leases if they chose to.
The proposed bill was met with fury.
Driving their anger to Wellington, this convoy of farmers set to lobby the government once more.
So I'm prepared to arm myself and defend my property rights against anyone.
I'm Irish and I'm certainly not going to walk away from a fight.
How far will you go?
I'd probably use a max.
Rob Poole is the chair of the West Coast Lessees Association.
Thank you so much, Rob, for agreeing to have a kōrero with us.
It represents 300 Taranaki perpetual leaseholders.
The government tried to change the law in a way that was going to severely affect the value of the lessee's interest. This is from our point of view, which we thought was wrong. And so the government got taken to the High Court and they lost. So there's now a precedent set that they can't really go and interfere with property rights like they tried to then. So hopefully they won't try that again, but they could. If so, the same thing will probably happen.
Do you think in the future there could be anything done to create a more just outcome for both parties?
Yes, I think there is, but that would come with a hefty price tag from the government. And what I wonder is whether the government would wear that. It's interesting because it gives you, when you're sitting in a position where the government could, at the stroke of a pen, take away a lot of the value that you thought you've accumulated over your lifetime. It gives you a renewed respect for people who have got grievances with the Crown, put it that way. Yeah.
Do you think the leaseholders today understand the injustice that was done to those Māori landowners all those years ago?
Generally speaking, I'm not sure they give it a lot of thought. I think that they believe they are paid for the improvements on the block that they're farming, and they believe that those improvements belong to them. They bought the land, or didn't buy the land, bought the lease in good faith based on the rules that were around it on the day that said that they could continue to farm it in perpetuity, and the improvements that they add to it were theirs. And I don't really think that they think so much about the other side. So I don't think that there's a lot of thought that this is a racial issue for the farmers. It's simply a business arrangement that they're in with another party based on there's legislation around it that they believe protects their interests. And when that legislation is interfered with, they always will have a beef with that.
The government has caved in to the sight of a herd of tractors coming down the road.
Ultimately, the government abandoned the more ambitious recommendations, passing a watered-down version.
There's nothing hook or by crook in this, not at all.
The Māori Land Reserve Amendment Act, 1997. It guaranteed lessees the right to continue to renew their leases in perpetuity.
Let's get on and let's pass the legislation and let's give the owners and the lessees the chance for certainty.
It also allowed for 7-year rental reviews and the phasing in of market rents on the unimproved value of the land.
What is the unimproved value? So we own the state of the land as at 1880 in its bare form before it was improved. Coming up with a valuation on that, as far as I'm aware, there haven't been any comparable sales of land in its natural state since 1880 since 1880. So, it's a very hypothetical process, which very, very, very few people understand.
Landowners and lessees, including the West Coast farmers, received compensation for the move to negotiated rentals. The Act also gave Māori landowners the first right of refusal if a lessee was to sell up, meaning owners have the right to buy back the lease on their land for market value. Pareninihi ki Waitotara has spent a fortune buying theirs.
Since 1997, when the Māori Reserve Lands Act was amended, we have acquired back around about 2,700 hectares. So that's about 14% of our land portfolio. That's come at a cost of around $50 million. But coming back to the 17,000 hectares that are still outstanding, in rough numbers, in order for us to regain control of that, we would have to purchase that at a cost of around $350 to $400 million. That's the price of control over our own whenua that we legally own.
But back in Te Tairāwhiti, these changes have had minimal benefit for the tuatini owners wanting to buy theirs.
The barriers are, firstly, you've only got 20 days to make this decision. Now that means you've got to call a meeting of the owners, you've got to get the information together. The other big barrier is you have to buy back the lease. So somehow you've got to arrange finance in 20 days as well, or make plans to arrange finance. And that's the biggest barrier. And it's always been hard to borrow against Māori land from corporate banks.
Did the government provide any financial assistance to Māori landowners to buy back the leases?
It was supposed to be what was called a purchase fund, sort of the seed money to purchase the lease. But by the time that payment was distributed across all the reserve land properties and the township properties, and that was done proportionately on the value of the land, so the average purchase fund payment in Tokomaru Bay at Tuatini was $360. And that was supposed to be a fund for them to buy back a section with a house on it, or the campground, or whatever. So, not surprisingly, the owners just voted for the payments to be distributed and paid out for them because they weren't presented with much hope of actually getting the land back under their control.
When you hear politicians talk about one law for all New Zealanders and you reflect on these perpetual leases, what conclusion do you come to?
I know of a lot of laws that only apply to Māori and Māori do not benefit from those laws. There hasn't been one law for all in New Zealand since 1840.
We have lobbied government and expressed our concern and showed them the inequity and the issues we face. This is just not a priority for them. But in the meantime, my cousin said he ran into one of our relations pushing a shopping trolley with his belongings and his dog down the main road of Gisborne. How can that be? Can that be okay? You know, look at this land. We come from paradise. And he can't put a batch on here? He's homeless on the streets of Gisborne? He's a landowner, for goodness sake. Nowhere is that okay.
We wanted to put Tina's concerns to the statutory body that's administered her whenua since 1955.
We made multiple requests to Te Tumu Paeroa, the Māori trustee, Dr. Charlotte Severn, for an interview about the tuatini blocks and the perpetual lease system. She declined.
But in an email exchange, she acknowledged the complexity of the legislation and the limited ability of owners to buy back land.
In my time as Māori trustee, from time to time we have received a notice under this right of first refusal provision. However, unfortunately on these occasions, the lessor trust has not been in a financial position to purchase the leasehold interest.
As to the tuatini blocks, she confirms
some owners of the tuatini lands wish to be appointed responsible trustee of those ahu whenua trusts in place of the Māori trustee, and my team at Te Tumu Paeroa is currently working alongside those tuatini owners, their legal representatives and the Māori Land Court to resolve some land title issues with their blocks before this occurs.
And she acknowledges
when the Māori trustee is eventually replaced by owner trustees, this will have no impact on the perpetually renewable leases over those lands, which will remain in force under the current legislative framework. I, along with those administrators and governors, lobby and advocate continuously for the termination and end to these leases.
Regarding administration fees, she says,
I want to be clear. The Māori trustee only charges commission at the statutory rate on rental received for lease administration. This is at 7.5% of rental actually received. Owners are not charged for lease administration where there is no lease. However, there will be and is work that needs to be carried out for a trust, regardless of whether there is a lease, and this is charged at an enormously subsidised rate.
The government has spoken about its commitment to equal treatment for all New Zealanders under the law and its desire to repeal bad legislation. So what does this mean for perpetual leases that only apply to Māori land?
As a former board member of Parinini Hiki Waitotara, the Minister of Māori Development is well versed in the history of perpetual leases. But Tama Pōtaka declined our requests for an interview, so we've come to Parliament to put some questions to him.
Is perpetual leases on whenua Māori fair and just?
I don't have any comments on that. I think it's been subject to a lot of legislative change over the years. For example, the Māori Reserve Lands Amendment Act in 1998 or 1997. And it's a matter that continues to pervade.
You don't have any comment on whether it's a fair or just law?
No, I don't. It is the law. That's what I would say. And perhaps it's something
what would you say to those people in Tuatini and the Tupumaru who have been waiting for 130 years to be able to access their land?
Yeah, no, it's pretty tough for various entities such as, and whānau, such as many owners of land in Taranaki. And that's the law today. And that's what it is. It is what it is.
Dion Tuta from Parinini Waitotara says that it would take about $400 million to buy back the leases. Given your government's just given $2.9 billion to landlords for reductions, wouldn't it be fair to just buy them out?
Well, that's not a priority for the government today. The priorities have been set out in the 9 key targets.
What's your priority?
Well, the priority in the 9 key targets, my priority is emergency housing.
The irony is the people at Tuatini are actually homeless and they have land.
Look, it's really unfortunate to hear about that. I don't know the specifics of the people at Tuatini, but what I do know is that there's a lot of perpetual lease land out there, and also there's a lot of landlocked land out there, and those are issues that we've discussed and debated between you and I and others over the years.
Will you make a commitment? Will you make a commitment to looking at a repeal?
No, I'm not going to make that commitment right now, but I certainly am very aware of those issues, as I am aware of many issues that affect or afflict the development of Māori land.
So, no help on the horizon for Māori landowners. And while the success of Parenene Ki Waitotara shows what can be achieved when Māori administer their own whenua for the people of Tuatini, it's a double-edged sword.
If we took over administrating our whenua, we would be obligated to honour the perpetual leasing because it's entrapped in the legislation from the Māori Township Act. We need the legislation removed. We want it abolished. That's what we've asked for, to abolish perpetual leasing in Tuatini Township.
Today, I'm meeting with one of the current Tuatini lessees.
Well, this is basically theft. Unfortunately, we're the thieves involved at the moment, but it is theft, so it's something should be done about it.
Peter Cunningham owns Cafe 35, which he bought in 2021.
When did you start to realise that, oh, this might not be as fair as I thought it could have been, or it might not have been the deal of the century for them?
Yes, and it took just a few months. We met some owners, found out how little they were getting out of it, and we thought, this is really not right.
Did you feel guilty?
Yeah. But we were kind of committed.
And you were saying that one of your workers is a landowner or shareholder.
Yeah.
And when you found that out, that must have been a bit weird.
Yeah, well, especially when I found out how much she was getting a year. Yeah. $17.89.
For everything?
For everything, yeah.
That sounds criminal.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
After learning more, Peter signed a petition to end the leases.
If you didn't have to borrow all the money to even get here in the first place, would that be a consideration for you, to turn the lease back over to the owners?
I don't think it'll make a big difference because how is the land going to be used with multiple ownership is a really big problem. And you'll find around Toko that there are lots of places with multiple ownership and no maintenance is done because no one wants to be the one who's paying for all the maintenance. And, things are falling into disrepair. Even if we gave it back, who would run it?
Well, we don't know because it's never happened to them, but perhaps they could run it and perhaps they could all get together and do the maintenance.
Yeah, that's not happening in general.
It appears to be one of those things that politicians say and councils say about multiple ownership, but really it's just a family of 390 owners who, if they were able...
Quite a big family, yeah.
Yeah, but if they were able to be on their whenua, who knows? There's a housing crisis here. They could have a house.
You get 390 on here.
They're living in cars.
Yes, I know. Yeah. And in containers and with no electricity and running water, yeah, I know.
Tēnei te mihi rawa te kia tātou e te whānau. If you ever go across the sea to Waimā, then maybe...
Perhaps what's most remarkable about the perpetual leases is how Māori landowners have endured a century worth of injustice with such dignity, and the generosity they continue to show to those who've benefited from their loss.
At the end of the day, it's not the people who are on the leases today. They didn't do this. They're utilising an unbalanced system. It's not their fault. It's the system itself that's corrupt and that has alienated us. And those that know about it and continue to allow it. Because they do know.
There's There's one last twist in the story of Tuatini. While we were researching its history, we discovered a special document. It's Tina's grandfather, Hori Whakataka's enlistment form for World War I, the paper he signed to join the Pioneer Battalion. And it's also signed by a witness.
William Oates. What the hell?
The same man who ended up with Hori's land.
You know, for the last few years, we've gone to members of Parliament for help. You know, this isn't big for them. This isn't a priority for them, but it's for us. It is for us.
How does that make you feel about the service of your grandfather for this country?
Obviously, we're hurt and broken and angry. Imagine how he must have felt to return home to nothing. He's lost his leg, you know, and he's come home and all he has is a small section on the hill. There was nothing else left. It all gone.
Like her grandfather before her, Tina has no fear of the fight ahead, and she won't give up until her whenua is returned.
You know, it was by pen it was taken, and it's by pen it can be given back. It's that simple. It doesn't have to be expensive or difficult or challenging. It's as simple as that. All we need is a government that can see the inequities and injustice of what's happened to us. And at the stroke of a pen, it will be returned.
Are you hopeful?
I'm always hopeful. You know, because, okay, I'm here today, but there's a whole generation following. It's taken us long enough to come out, to tell our story, and we're not going to end till we get it back. This ain't going to stop now.
Ka nui te mihi ki te puna whakatonga rewa.